Hello, everyone, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending where you are. My name is Andreoni. I'm going to be chairing this last seminar of the IIPP Seminar Series for this year. Today we are particularly pleased to have two excellent speakers, but also two colleagues from IIPP who are going to act as discussant. The seminar is going to be about quite an important question, and the authors have already published an article out of this presentation, so you will have a chance to also read an extended article. The question is a European recovery possible without high-tech public corporations? And the authors and speakers for today are Professor Daniele Archibugi, who is a professor at Birkbeck College in London, professor in innovation, governance, and public policy. And Daniele is also research director at the Italian National Research Council, and he has been leading a number of research programs and publications on issues related to economics of science and innovation and technology, industrial innovation policy, and he's been also teaching in several UK and Italian institutions, such as the University of Cambridge, London School of Economics, Rome, Lewis, and Sapienza. Alongside Daniele, there is also Dr. Vitantonio Mariella, who is also working at the Italian National Research Council, where he's conducting a postdoc working on economic history, development, structural change, and economics of innovation. And his research is very much at the core of this project, at this paper. So we are looking forward to hear you as well. Before I leave the floor to our speakers, and while participants join the session, let me also say a couple of words about our two discussants. This was one of those topics which attracted lots of attention. So we wanted to have already two discussants, not just one. Professor Erik Reinert, who is an honorary professor at IIPP and has been with us in several events, doesn't need too much of an introduction, being an authority in economic growth, transformation, technical change, and he has been, of course, participating in a number of events at IIPP, and also Reinert Kattel, who is our deputy director and professor here at UCL in the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. Both of them have worked on this specific topic of public corporations and, of course, European recovery. So we will really enjoy the discussion as soon as we move to the second part of the event. So without further ado, we will, as usual, having our speakers talking for 35, maximum 40 minutes. Then we will have 8 to 10 minutes comments from Erik and Reinert, and we will then open the floor for other participants who wants to join the discussion. Without further ado, Daniele and Vitantonio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Very pleased to give this presentation at your institute because we are very much moving along similar lines, and therefore it would be very important for us to get your feedback. And I'm also pleased to say that today's article, this short article, has been published in Intereconomics, and therefore, you know, it's already there, open for the discussion, criticism, or whatever else it is needed. And Vito and I started to work on this issue because, you know, first of all, we are in very peculiar moments, in a moment in which new ideas are needed, in which, in Europe especially, there are new opportunities represented by the European Recovery Plan, by the what hopefully can be a new deal which is definitely putting an end to 12 years of economic austerity, which have really stopped in many ways the European development. And therefore, we are very much looking for a new paradigm, new policies, and therefore, I think we think that to remember the lesson of Roosevelt might be appropriate. As you know, it's not the first time that Roosevelt has been recalled, and often with nothing has happened. Hopefully this time something more will happen. So what is the issue we are addressing? Can Europe regain technological leadership? And indeed, we know that by a variety of indicators, Europe has been losing ground for several years. And especially since we believe that not all the technological areas are equal, if we concentrate on the technological areas which are likely to be the backbone of the future economic development, you really see that Europe is not there. These technologies are dominated by a restricted oligopoly of American corporations. Very happy that apparently the G7 has arranged for this corporation to pay at least some fair taxes in Europe, but it's quite clear that none of these corporations is a European corporation. And that is a major problem, you know? And therefore, what are the economic policy instruments which can be used in order to regain technological leadership in such a situation? If we look at the context, just at the very aggregate level, if you look at R&D expenditure, for example, we really see that the United States are still dominating in terms of expenses, and that Europe is still doing an important effort, but on the fast lane, we see now China and not any longer Europe. So, as many people have suggested, if there is any indication of what will be the challenger of the United States, it's more likely that the challenger will be China and not Europe. Take into account this data report the expenditure, and perhaps we should also look at the number of researchers and engineers. And since European researchers and engineers are more expensive in terms of salaries than the Chinese researchers and engineers, even in Italy, we earn more than our Chinese colleagues. Perhaps the gap is even more worrying. In other sense, it's more likely that Chinese researchers and engineers are such a huge population that they will be able to take to produce more innovations the next years. What are the economic tools available at the European level? Well, we know them, the framework programs within Europe, now the next Horizon Europe, what can be done through the European Investment Bank activities. But if we concentrate with the framework programs, which are at the European level, the most important instrument, we really see that they support two and sometimes contradictory targets. On the one hand, they have the target to generate new capabilities as a frontier, which should be able to compete with at the world level, with the United States, with Japan, with China, with everybody else. On the other hand, they are also a target which is of dissemination of knowledge. And that's understandable, because the framework programs are paid by everybody within the European Union, from Portugal to Romania, not just from Germany and France and the most advanced of Sweden, by all of them. And therefore, in order to convince all the European Union member countries that they contribute to these programs, of course, these programs would like that at least their outcome in terms of knowledge and dissemination and diffusion of knowledge is provided also to them. So somehow there is a contradiction between the attempt to create knowledge as a frontier and the need to disseminate knowledge in a situation which is much more difficult than in the United States, where they speak one language, where everybody is member of the same academic societies, while in Europe, everything is more difficult, and therefore the attempt to generate a European research area and so on is more complicated than that. Of course, the resources at European level are just a minority of the total budget, and still this minority should be put in context. And if we look at what is invested by the top corporations, you really see that all the Horizon 2020 resources are comparable to to the R&D budget of a major corporation, including Microsoft or Volkswagen, definitely less than Amazon and Alphabet, a bit more than Johnson & Johnson. But really, you appreciate very much that, you know, there is a problem, and the problem is that, you know, these data are not really sufficient to sustain the total activity of the European Union. Are there multiplying efforts? Yes, of course they are. And here, you know, when we speak about mission-oriented actions, is Mariana there? Is Mariana in the room?
I don't see her now.
No, it's okay.
She might be trying to join, yeah.
Okay, so it's good that I put a picture of her. So at least if she's virtually with us, you know, because I mean, if we look at the mission-oriented programs, including the old philosophy, which was sponsored by Chris Freeman already at the beginning of the 90s, and the new version by Mariana and others, you really hope that you can do something more with these resources, you know? And in terms of mission-oriented programs, I've recovered an old slide of Freeman in 1992, in which precisely for the European Commission, he tried to make a comparison between the old and the new mission-oriented projects. Since Freeman was our mentor of a large number of scholars working on innovation policy and technological change, I think that's really impressive to see that nearly 30 years ago, he pointed out some of the core issues which we are debating today. And namely that on the one hand, we had the old ones which had somehow were not so much concentrated on economic feasibility, while the new one, at the time Chris Freeman was already advising the European Commission, perhaps at the time was not a very successful advisor, but still the policy target was to advise the European Commission. You really see that he was suggesting some mission-oriented policies oriented towards environmental technologies, which were very different from the military space activities carried out with the Manhattan Project back in 1940s, back with the moon landing project of the 60s, and so on. And I think that even now, we need very much to go into the European Union to support such a vision of diffusion-oriented, economic-oriented, and bottom-up mission-oriented approach that Freeman is suggesting. So, Andreoni and Chang, what would be the implications for industrial policy? What to do? Indeed, we think that the European Union should not just act as a regulator, even if regulations can be very important, and should also take into account that so far the several attempts carried out by the European economy to start into the new fields with startups have been successful and unsuccessful. Have been so successful that at a certain point, all the small companies were taken by larger American corporations through mergers and acquisitions. And in the typical Schumpeterian vein, at a certain point, I mean, the late Schumpeterian vein, at a certain point, oligopolistic competition start to buy new companies or even new brains. I remember what my friend Abel Ferrara did in his film New Rose Hotel, where there is a competition across companies, and this competition is for new ideas, and companies compete with each other by hiring the most talented scientists, you know, and engineers. And, you know, when you got all the cash flow, all the market capitalization of Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, and all the others, it's very easy to do the full Monty, just to buy the successful corporation long before this successful corporation can become a real challenger. So what to do? I mean, of course, we heard it before, the Lisbon strategy, invest more, invest more, invest more. I'm not sure if the young in the room know anything about the Lisbon strategy because it was 20 years ago, but we know also that nothing has happened. And that was long before the financial crisis of 2008, because for almost a decade from the Lisbon strategy until 2008, there was not really any policy action carried out from the European Union to make the challenge and to try to, regain the technological leadership, at least in some sectors. And after 20 years, if we look at the challengers of the big American corporations, what do we see? We see the Chinese companies. And actually, all these Chinese companies are really competing in each of the areas of the dominant American corporations, while we do not have any specific case of the European corporation. What can we do? And I pass the mic to Vito.
Yes. So now that we have seen that all the big tech corporations are either American or Chinese, let's try to ask ourselves what the European Union has done so far. And actually, it has done something which is related to some alliances that it has launched in the past years. Most of all, in some strategic sectors that involve the exploitation of some enabling technologies. So we reported here an example of capacity building, as we call it in this case, which is the so-called European Battery Alliance. The European Battery Alliance was launched in the past years in order to build production capacity in this specific industry. And in order to do so, the European Union has used several traditional policy instruments to do so. First of all, he allowed national governments to provide state aids up to 3 billion euros. Then he decided to promote collaboration and this diffusion of knowledge and research results among all the private agents involved in this venture. And he also focused on grants and loans that were provided at very low interest rates for all the European battery value chain and all the ventures involved in this specific industry. And most of the time, we're talking about small and medium enterprises. But I would like to spend also some words on what the European wants to do in some other strategic sectors. First of all, he launched several kind of alliances, not only in the battery industry, but also in the raw materials, in the plastics and the hydrogen sector. But he's trying also to challenge the incumbent firms in other important strategic sectors, such as the semiconductors and the cloud computing technologies, so in the sector of data. In the first case, the semiconductors, we know that are very important because they empower all the smart devices and all the services we use every day. The main issue here is that the European retains a very small market share with respect to other competitors, and most of the time they are either American and Chinese, and so it's trying to not be dependent on other foreign corporations and foreign countries with respect to production, because this is highly attached to supply risks most of the cases due to export restrictions. There are, in some cases, also some geopolitical tensions and a lack of, as it is called, a level playing field that can harm competition in this area. And also in the sector of data, this is a key enabling technology for a green and digital transition in the next future. So the EU is trying to build production capacity, and as in the case of the European Battery Alliance, because the four global leaders, which are Amazon Web Services, Alibaba Cloud, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure retain more than the 80% of total global revenues this year in 2021. So the market position and also the size of these hyperscalers, these companies, harm the possibility to enter, to be competitive, and to challenge them in this market. This is the main reason why we have a huge investment gap with US and China. But although cloud users have a small, have little possibility to switch from one cloud service provider to another, they always express concerns, complaints about the use of foreign cloud services because of personal data protection, cyber security, and also for questions over applicable law. So we say that actually the European Union should enter these specific strategic sectors in order to challenge them. And in the case of the battery industry, it is not required to have large corporations because challenges can be also small and medium enterprises. But we ask ourselves, what about firms entering oligopolistic markets? How can the European Union challenge very big high-tech corporations? What has been done so far? Has the European Union done anything so far? Yes, it did it. It did it with the joint venture of Airbus and Concorde, which were some joint ventures that were launched during the 60s to challenge the firms, the corporations in the airplanes manufacturing sector that at the time was considered a strategic sector. They were all in the hands of the US and Soviet Union countries that were strongly supported for military purposes due to the existence of war, of course. What about Concorde? Concorde was the result of a French and British joint venture where the French and British empires joined their forces to compete with the Soviet Union in that case. And it was a result of a combination of existing technology market trajectories, because it was essentially a jet engine passenger aircraft that was developed during the 60s and introduced in 1961, when France decided to switch its technological base from the production of jets to that of turbofans in order to exploit UK leadership in passenger market. So at the beginning it was a technological success, but ended up being an economic failure, a commercial fiasco due to its high consumption costs, fossil fuel costs, and maintenance costs. So at the end of the day, only 20 airplanes were manufactured, and most of the time they were purchased by the flag carrier airlines companies, their respective airlines companies, most of the time British Airways and Air France. So this is an example of a typical old mission-oriented. But what about Airbus? Airbus instead was a successful case because it was different from Concorde in the sense that all the efforts were pushed toward the civilian component rather than on the military component. It started as a Franco-German venture in 1969, but subsequently opened also to Germany, United Kingdom and Spain, in order to try to challenge the incumbent airplane manufacturers. They were all American at the time. They were Boeing, Lockheed, and McDonnell Douglas. So paraphrasing Susan Strange, in that case, different states that were rival, commercially speaking, put in place different companies in order to fight a commercial battle, because there were a lot of European complaints because US assigned public military procurement to Boeing, and so there were a lot of state aids in order to favor Boeing rather than other rival companies. But also European companies responded with subsidies for research and development investments, fiscal incentives, and also some political pressure in order to convince the respective airlines company to purchase aircrafts from Airbus rather than from Boeing. So there were a lot of cases that were the object of judicial disputes that were brought in front of the GATT, the WTO, for this kind of European subsidies given to Airbus. But at the end of this commercial rivalry, Airbus won this battle because Airbus is a good product. As I said, there was a greater focus on the civilian component, and this resulted in having airplanes that were cheaper to maintain and consumer friendly. So the United States, although it's their strong level of merging and acquisitions, Airbus managed to have at least a world duopoly, was able to enter this monopolistic, or at the time, oligopolistic market. There were welfare benefits for all consumers, above all, including those people living in the United States. And for the first time in 2019, 2 years ago, Airbus became the first world company, for the first time overtaking Boeing. So with these two joint ventures, we can ask ourselves, why should countries collaborate? In that case, they decided to collaborate because there was a recombination of specialization patterns in order to exploit their technological basis. France decided to switch its technological base from the production of jets to turbofans in order to exploit the leadership of the UK in the passenger aircraft market. So in that case, the recombination, the reshuffling of competencies and technologies and specialization patterns favored both countries. But in the specific case of Germany and Spain, it was different because Germany had lost its expertise, its specialization in the production of aircraft after the Second World War. Whereas Spain had no expertise at all in the production of airplanes manufacturing, of aircraft, sorry. So in that case, Airbus provided an opportunity to leave their old specialization pattern to enter a new market segment with frontier technologies in order to make a catch up with the most advanced countries. So Airbus entry into the aircraft passenger market may be conceived either as a reshuffling of competencies and technological specializations for some countries, but also as a developing strategy for others who are not at the technological frontier. So we ask ourselves, could European airplanes have been generated with Airbus? We argued that it could have been possible because when there is a lack of willingness, we say, to bear risks by private economic agents, the public government should intervene directly with the creation of public companies that, in that case, differently from the one that we suggest, they were created outside the framework of the European Union. So even though governments provided through the enactment, the implementation of the traditional policy instruments, political support, financial resources, without a company, we argue it would have been impossible to enter this into this oligopolistic market. So now that we stated that actually the public government should intervene, we should ask ourselves in which emerging industries the government should invest the most. And there are some criteria to justify research and development investments in some sectors and not in others. First of all, we have to look at the vulnerability and the dependency of the European Union from foreign corporations and so from foreign countries, because of supply risk associated with the production of some particular enabling technologies that are involved in the production of strategic products that the European Union doesn't have in its territory. And also we can look at some goals, some objectives that the European Union must state in terms of technological sovereignty, for example. The criteria to choose the most promising enabling technology are different. First of all, we can look at the growth rate of production and productivity, because looking at the past statistics, one can see whether there was already an exponential growth in some specific sectors. But even though we look at when production starts increasing exponentially, perhaps the position of nations in the international division of labor could be already established. So it is difficult to prevent. So we say that one should look at the degree of dynamism and at the level of pervasiveness of these enabling technologies. How can one do that? For example, one can look also at the number of entries in a specific sector of new firms in the recent past, but also the rapidly growing academic literature and the patents often indicate the most rewarding scientific and technological areas. Whereas if we look at the level of pervasiveness of some sector, we aim mainly those enabling technologies that will be necessary for the delivery of most products, processes, and services. So the ones that are the most impactful in some lines of production. In the first case, it may be too late to enter some strategic sector, whereas in this second case, also by looking at the political intuition, because sometimes it is not difficult to see which are the most promising sectors in the years to come, such as, for example, in the sectors of artificial intelligence and social networks. In this case, it is possible to anticipate which industries will be dominant in the next future. So we conclude by asking ourselves the same question we raised at the beginning of the presentation. Can Europe regain technological leadership? We say that this is possible by adding a new policy instrument in the policy instruments of the European Union, the creation of European public companies. This attempt can be replicated not only for those sectors in which the European Union has already an economic advantage, such as, for example, in the case of green technologies or healthcare services, but also in those sectors in which the European Union has a gap that must be filled, must be closed with respect to the incumbent foreign corporations. Of course, we know that this implies to reduce competition, to artificially create public monopolies. But if we look at the entry of an European public company in already oligopolistic markets in a global perspective, actually we are raising up the level of competition, the level of competition in global markets. So the European Union must decide whether it wants to enter this strategic sectors or remain out of them. In this case, we argue that antitrust policies, so anti-monopolistic competition that is certainly a tool, must be more indulgent towards those patient money that is directed towards this kind of strategic sectors and that are aimed to enhance the production capacity in those enabling technologies in the European Union. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Daniele. Thanks, Vitantonio. I think it was a very interesting set of perspectives around the topic, which we are all very interested in. So I don't want to waste any time. I'll open the floor for Erik and then Reinert for a set of remarks, questions, and I will keep mine for later on. Erik, please.
Thank you. I think this is really an excellent presentation, and you're going to getting to a very strong point. And one of the point is why cooperate? Well, I think there is something called minimum efficient size, which was a gentleman by the name of Alfred Chandler who coined that. And clearly the minimum efficient size of economic units has grown. You know, Estonia with 1 million people could be really fairly self-sufficient in the 1930s when they were richer than Finland. And but now that's a problem. Well, one way to get around that is by concentrating on niches, right? And since you talk about airplanes, I think it's a very interesting case in Brazil with Embraer, who has taken out one niche in the airplane market and really gone for that. I remember how surprised I was about 30 years ago when I was flying on Lufthansa and found that the plane had been made in Brazil, right? So actually, one way of getting around this is to go for a smaller niche of the total market. But and I think this minimum efficient size it could be useful in your analysis. It also has to do with China, of course, and I think what you said about the previous European strategy is very true. I think the Lisbon strategy boiled down to a laundry list of good intentions, and it wasn't terribly constructive. And during the Cold War, more and more neoclassical economics took over, and I think this is we also have an ideology problem here. The state is not seen the way Roosevelt saw it. The state is seen more as an ideological enemy. This is left from Reagan and Thatcher, unfortunately. So that's another barrier. But I would also like to point to that there is some kind of competition here with financial capital. When Italy in the 1970s and 80s had a very fast growth in industrialization and real wages, it was at a time when real interest rates were heavily negative, right? So I've seen this from close. When wages go up and then the real interest rate is -8%, well, you invest a lot in new machinery, and you saw that in the Italian economy when the whole machinery grew up in Emilia-Romagna, and it looked very irresponsible. The labor union policy of creating this inflation looked very irresponsible, but in the end, it forced industry to invest. Right? So here, and a person who is a couple of years older than me, Mario Draghi, he lived through this period as a nightmare because he had inherited boni del tesoro from his parents, and he saw his income, his capital being reduced by up to 8% a year, right? So I think now we are in a situation where there is a competition with financial capital. You might be able to make more money by getting into this asset price inflation of housing. Maybe you make more money from asset price inflation in housing than you do from producing. And I think here we're back to an old conflict in capitalism, the real economy versus the financial economy. And I think part of your solution should perhaps also point to that. How much more money you might be able to make by investing in dead assets. I think Carlota Perez actually has pointed to this, that the so-called oil crisis in the 1970s, which produced a tremendous inflation also in the United States, since the money in the bank was shrinking at such a high rate, people took tremendous risks going into new companies in Silicon Valley. So I think I don't know where she's written it, but I think this is a pertinent analysis that maybe we have made it we can make too much profit from the financial economy, and that actually keeps us out of the real economy. That could be part of the problem. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Erik. Reinert, maybe we collect both comments and then we give a chance to address them before we open the floor. Reinert, please.
All right. Yeah, I'll be quick. And thanks for the very fascinating presentation. And I think it's a really good discussion to be had in the European policy space, but I think it's changing partially because of COVID as well. I think I'll come to that. So I basically have like three comments. One is I think they're like quite different Europes actually. So you talk about Europe, but Europe is perhaps much more diverse than let's say US or China for historical reasons, of course. But you know, if you look at the examples you brought, I think you mentioned Concorde and Airbus. These are big industrial nations working together that have more or less similar sort of levels of economic structure or types of economic structure. This is the old sort of Krugmanian, increasing returns working here. But I think then if you look at something like Erik mentioned Estonia has more unicorns than France does. So these are all unicorns in ICT. So there's very different needs here, I think, for countries to do policy and also to think about policy. And probably you don't want to have a sort of European public corporation in a space where you have a rapid growth of startups anyway. So this leads me to sort of my second point is I think that different activities might require very different policy interventions or types of policy interventions. So if you look at something like green technology and green transition, you probably need to look at financial sector rather than sort of industrial sector. So you need to look at like central bank financing and things like that, or financial institutions. You might need to create something that is already there, for instance, like European Investment Bank, something that is similar to this sort of a financial institution rather than a company per se. But then if you look at, for instance, as I said, digital space, you probably need to actually look at something from the competition and then antitrust policies to actually make sure that there is more of a market actually in the EU and to let those technologies and companies grow. But then if you look at artificial intelligence, this is where you probably have the best case to make for a European public company. Because if you look at, for instance, what happened with DeepMind here in the UK, you can argue this was the best strategic asset EU actually had in artificial intelligence, and it was bought by Google a couple of years ago, and it's now the leading company in artificial intelligence in the world, probably. So you have a good argument to make that perhaps this kind of company should be public, but in other areas, I think it's much more difficult to make an argument that there should be like industrial company. And third, I think I would argue that that EU needs to deal much more with what we call like industrial or economic policy space. This is the argument from development economics actually, and because if you look at what EU is now sort of trying to again to rediscover industrial policy, but still we have no idea what it actually is. We know that it's not really aligned with missions, for instance, in R&D space. So this is in parallel. There is something EU is trying to do in industrial policy, and I think this sort of alignment of these policies have always been EU's problem. But what does EU mean by industrial policy? I think is entirely sort of not clear at all. What is industrial policy, for instance? And this policy space, but also in fiscal policy space. Most countries are constrained by a fiscal policy space in EU and regulations, and I think it would make a lot of sense to argue that the COVID regulations that are now allowing countries to borrow much more than typical Maastricht criteria allow should be probably continued with industrial policy agenda, so that governments can actually invest in industrial policy more than they do now. And one of the things that they might think about is indeed to create those joint companies. And I think the third area I would again come back to is finance. Actually, if you look at what European Central Bank has done over the last 12 years almost through quantitative easing programs, European Central Bank has spent in 1 month the same amount as the framework program spent in 7 years. So there's not a lack of money in our finance in EU. It's just how do we spend it? So that it seems that we have way too much money, and that there is no sort of policy instruments to actually tackle or to channel this money into the spaces. So these are my comments at this point. But thank you very much for the paper.
Thanks, Reinert. I think you have already quite a lot of things to go through, so I'll wait for the next round to raise a few comments. Up to you if you want to start from each of them or cluster them in the best possible way. Daniele.
Thank you very much for the comments. We are very much into the same line. So, I mean, I think that, Erik, of course, is totally right when he argues that we should look at niches. The problem within the European Union is that at a certain point, you need to organize niches of production which involve more than one country. It's not enough to decide that you are going to move into a new field with all the possible forces. It is also important how you are going to organize the production in 27 countries. And the case of Concorde and Airbus were both cases in which there was a joint venture between two countries only, France and the United Kingdom on the one hand, France and Germany on the other hand. That was at the beginning. When you have to decide how you're going to organize it with 27 countries, it becomes much more difficult. And that's, of course, in this case, you might try to organize the production in a more intelligent way, but it's definitely not easy. And for what Reinert said, yes, indeed, that's, I mean, precisely the difference across European countries in which all of them, if anything is going to happen, would like to have their share. Now, let me say, and then let's see what I would expect as a critical remark which does not come from our approach. Some people will say, why do you complain? Europe has still a surplus in the balance of trade with the United States. What's the matter if you continue to sell shoes and fashion bags and import computers? And I think that we know the Schumpeterian answer. But of course, we should also be aware the Schumpeterian answer, the Listian answer, kick the ladder away, Antonio. And that, of course, would be, and that's, but this still is an answer which needs to react. Because if Europe will start to do anything like that, for sure it will start a commercial war with the United States, which will be much more severe than the war which has just, started about the fiscal purposes, and that, of course, is going to be to create major problems. There are ways in which you can deal about this problem. You can deal with this problem with alliances, with joint ventures involving also corporations from the outside the European Union. But of course, to get the entrepreneur, not state, the entrepreneur Europe into the business is not something which is done without a strong political support. A political support which, when Airbus started its business, was very strong within Europe. I can remember to the young people in the room, the Lockheed scandal. I don't know if you ever heard about that. Lockheed was an American corporation which used to bribe everybody in Europe in order to sell its airplanes, including the royal families of the Netherlands and so on. And when you get a scandal like that, it becomes a bit easier to sell Airbuses and to convince other governments that they should buy these sort of things. But, is Europe prepared to do that? Is there enough leadership to do whatever it takes? I repeat, whatever it takes, not just in financial terms, as Reinert just reminded, but also in long-term productive capacity building. And that, of course, is another problem. Guido.
Just would like to.
Sorry, you need to come closer to the microphone, otherwise we cannot hear you.
I just wanted to add something on the minimum efficient size because
we still cannot hear you. Sorry.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, fantastic.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one thing on the minimum efficient size issue that was raised by Professor Reinert, because that was the main reason why I stated during the presentation that it is needed a new production capacity in those enabling technologies that are used and exploited in strategic sectors. But I don't know if actually it can be the only criterion by which to assess whether it is necessary, the introduction of this new policy instrument, the creation of a European public company, because, for example, I was wondering myself whether it is the case to value its introduction by looking at the social networks. In this case, I think it is not needed a large production capacity, or, for example, it is not needed in the case of cloud technologies, but it is. And that's the reason why I was also stressing the political intuition rather than other criteria to suggest in which enabling technologies the public government should intervene. Because it is crystal clear that in artificial intelligence, and this is linked what Professor Kattel was saying, the European Union should intervene without looking at past data. And actually, one of the main problems when I was carrying out this research project with Daniele, with Professor Archibugi, I was saying, okay, let's try to do more. Let's try to put in place an empirical analysis, an econometric analysis. What can we say? How can we recommend this policy to some governments by looking at past data? Sometimes it is very difficult to carry out a proper economic and econometric analysis and draw conclusions from that, because it is more related to arts than science, to political intuition, as I was saying. But yes, we can do more on that, on the line, on the minimum efficient size, and that is one possible follow-up of this paper, to look at this quantification of this policy recommendation, Whereas, as for the financial resources, I agree with Professor Kattel. Money are there for sure. So I don't agree with Daniele. Sometimes says about the European Community Framework programs, because once you told me that money must be diverted from European Framework programs to the creation of European public companies, I think that both policy instruments should be raised in order to do all these things. So it is not a problem of allocation of resources, but it's a problem to, raises the amount of money to do industrial policy. And that's it. I don't know if you want to.
No, fine.
Thanks. I think we can start involving the audience as well, because we have already one question from Elena. I'm going to allow her to join actually the discussion for your question. Please join the panel. And maybe if you can introduce yourself as well, would be great.
Hello, Elena.
Hello, Daniele. My name is Elena Kosmopoulou, yes. And my background is technology, so I would like to focus from something I didn't see you focusing very at all, actually. My interest is on technology and the production, and I think what you talked about is very valid, of course, and thank you for very interesting presentation. But the problem you said about high tech, which I think we absolutely need as in the European Union, I think the problems of setting it up, the finance and so on, are secondary to how we are going to justify that different countries, different companies contribute without losing their competencies. And that is something I would like to suggest a hybrid way from what you're saying, because I like the idea of public company, but not as you say it, not in general for the whole thing. I think the public company should do the management of competencies, of technologies, of how to put together, because we talk about now about systemic products. And we have a lot of different technologies. So instead of competing for the products and talk about products. We talk about competition in technologies, but convergence and working together in the final product. So setting up the product and then competing with individual countries, laboratories, and so on, and then bringing together 2 or 3 actors, so you don't have a pandemonium of a dozen actors trying to talk together about how to put things together. And in particular, the air industry, we have certain parts of it have not changed for decades. So they're very different, the plastics, the materials that we're using, the electronics, and so on. So we can differentiate that. We can pull this apart. It's not like the mythos all together bound. We can put it together apart and then put it together again in the most efficient way, and also for the benefit of all, because this is the important point to make, that we should all contribute, and then we should all reap the benefit as we have the product and the innovation and the technology, but also from the human resource. Because if we talk about competition about 2 countries, then you have only scientists from 1 or 2 countries. And we have different expertise, and this way we can develop complementarities in different areas that will also have a lot of spillovers in other industries. And then I think this is this is actually, maybe I don't explain it well. I'm not sure if I am making myself understood, but I think this is really a way to go forward. And I think it is worthwhile considering. And I would call it the Athenian way, because the old Athens tend to merge things. So you had the iconoclasts, you had the iconophiles, and then you have a mixture of both, and you have a way forward by putting things together. So that's my proposal to you.
Thanks, Elena. Let me just add a question which follows from your remark on the importance of understanding the heterogeneity of these different sectors and different activities. And I would say not just sectors, but very complex value chain that over the last 20, 30 years have been building up across Europe. And it's very difficult to always understand how integrated they are. To a certain extent, there are already some of these European companies, right, that are orchestrating complex supply chains. My question to Daniele and Vitantonio, following on this point, is if you could articulate a bit more what is distinctive about the digital platform you started with, the GAFA, the Google Alphabet, and so on, from the case you presented. Because it seems to me that the answer to, or at least to try to come to an answer why we lost capability in those specific platforms, require understanding what is distinctive about them that other type of relatively more traditional industrial sectors, even in the case of aerospace, which of course is very advanced, but in terms of business model, in terms of structure and so on, they are much more embedded in places and embedded into also government regulation. I mean, Daniele was referring, of course, to Chris Freeman, idea and the Lockheed case and so on. It's all about all this military complex, right? That is intrinsically built within aerospace, right? We cannot understand the aerospace industry, even in the UK. If you look at BAE and you look at a few other companies along the supply chain, they are very much building around that military complex. So I'm just wondering if you can say more about, the specific place where Europe is behind, significantly behind, and also to explain a bit more the heterogeneity of what you presented, right? So when we talk about Huawei, for example, the comparator to Huawei is the US Cisco, and the US Cisco lost capacity in manufacturing, not so much because there was no lack of industrial policy government support, but because the company became highly financialized. And while Huawei was investing and popping up in the top ranking of companies investing 10 plus billion a year in R&D and other type of fixed capital investment, companies like Cisco and many others in the US got highly financialized and they stopped doing the kind of job they were good, pretty good doing in the past. So I'm just trying to figure out, given that you started with this digital platform, I'm trying to understand what is, in your opinion, distinctive about this platform and how you understand them in the context of industrial policy? I think already Reinert mentioned, and you yourself, that this has to be discussed in the context of broader competition, antitrust, and industrial policy. So I would be very interested in hearing more about that, because I think the risk is that if the European Commission get the story of Airbus as a success story, which, by the way, again, is partially the result of a big failure of Boeing in the last 3-4 years. Boeing was using stock buybacks after the company got the first max down, and the catastrophe was clearly developing over time, and several people have written about that. So if you go to the European Union, you say we need these companies. What type of companies are we really talking about in the space of digital platform, where, as you said, we are really behind? What type of distinctive challenges you see there? What type of business model this would require? That's my question, and maybe you can address Helena remarks and questions and mine, while colleagues from all people attending are very welcome to either raise their hands or write a question in the chat.
It's okay. Well, I mean, Helena, yes, to match production and technology is very difficult. I definitely agree about that. And even more is if production is organized on a different geographic area, we should never forget that, for example, in the United States, production has been heavily concentrated in one part of the United States, one part only, and that's actually something which in Italy, in Europe would be controversial, because there will be a lot of controversies if you had to do it through European support. Why should it be, I don't know, a part of Europe and not another one? Why a part shouldn't go to a peripheral region and so on? And therefore, this, of course, will create quite a lot of problems. But still, I think that at a certain point, you need leadership. And if you don't have this leadership, you won't be able to regain technological capability. In this sense, let me say, I think that the model is a Roman model, somebody which is, driven by the center and which manages to get enough resources to mobilize the activities. About Antonio's question, that's the crucial question. Why some areas rather than others? I think we have got 2 tests to understand what are the crucial areas. The first one is the level of pervasiveness. I mean, again, when we speak about general purpose technology, techno-economic paradigms, or whatever you call them, you really see that there are some technologies which enter everywhere. And that has happened before. It has happened with the steam engine. It has happened with electricity. It's happening now with data and with information and communication technologies. But that's not the full story. The full story, and I think we economists in our club, we can provide some results, because we have got the possibility to test empirically, which are not only the areas where there is more scientific and technological opportunities, which is one of the criterions, but also if the scientific and technological opportunities are going across different technology and sectors. I remember very well that when I've just arrived at SPRU in 1984, I'm sorry if I continue to cite my mentor, Chris Freeman, he said very clearly why the future is going to be in microelectronics based on information technologies, that was the name at the time, and not nuclear technologies. He made a comparison between the two, and it was not obvious. And he said, because nuclear technology is localized and it does not enter directly into the production of many things. While here in each office, we need a computer expert, otherwise we block everything. At the time, at SPRU, as in many other places, there was one room only with terminals, and we had to book our space in the terminal in order to use this technology. But that was I mean, already then it was possible to understand that. But that's not all the story. The other story, if I can cite it, is our colleague Jacob Edler, which has just released this simple paper about technology sovereignty. And now I would say, if you go to a war, a real war, not a commercial war, with any part of the world, who is going to win? The side which is exporting shoes and bags, or the side which is exporting information systems and airplanes? And the response is quite obvious. You know, you don't. I mean, even Elena is agreeing with that. You don't win a war by having a fancy bag, even if the fancy bag costs as much as a very good computer. And that's the story. And therefore, I think that there are many other things that we should take into account, including, I repeat, what, for example, is, you know, I mean, we have seen the total European disaster in terms of COVID-19 vaccines. Since two of you are in the United Kingdom, actually three of you are in the United Kingdom, let me say that I always thought that Brexit was a very, very, very stupid thing. When I've seen the vaccination rate of the United Kingdom, I started to think that perhaps Brexit had a point, you know? Can you imagine the largest knowledge economy of the world, the largest market of the world, is still unable to produce itself, I repeat, to produce itself the vaccine for its population? And that's, you know, maybe we should start to think about that.
I don't know, Daniele, I don't think I agree with what your analysis there. We can have another discussion of who is actually producing and exporting the mRNA. We keep talking about Pfizer vaccine is a German company called BioNTech who developed that. The capacity in pharma is much higher in Europe than in the UK. We can keep going. In fact, we could say that since Europe has approached the problem using industrial policy, and the French minister has been going around and streamlining the supply chain, we are not, in Europe, we are not having big problems. And you know, the reliability of and the flexibility of the mRNA platform for vaccine vis-a-vis the one used, the vector used by AstraZeneca, is actually much higher, which means that relying on that platform technology for vaccine in Europe will allow, in case there are variation mutation, a much faster response and adaptation. So there are different, I think here we have to be careful. I would not be so supportive of that Brexit argument. But Erik, you wanted to say something before when Vitantonio was also mentioning about energy efficiency, scale efficiency and the minimum threshold there.
Well, this is really also a comment to what Daniele just said. Internally, to support its poor periphery, the European Union has an interesting concept of smart specialization, which takes us in your direction with handbags and whatnot. And obviously, if there is something called smart specialization, there is something which is less smart specialization, right? Selling your wheat to Italy and at $400 a ton and buying spaghetti back at 4,000 or whatever a ton is, according to the European Union, I worked for this program, is not smart specialization. And I think if you throw this totally anti-neoclassical notion into the debate and say, hey, this is what the European Union says, I mean, you can actually build some of your arguments about that. And that goes back to very, very old economic theory of adding value to raw materials, right? And you have the American debate on computer chips or potato chips. Does it matter? Well, and the answer to that is, if you look at the value added to the silicon sand in the silicon chips, that is considerably higher than the value added to the potato to make potato chips, right? So this opens up, I think, this EU concept, invented by a Spanish, by the way, and I think this opens up for some some discussion, right? That not all economic activities are like, and there are many ways to look at that. And the Americans are kind of reinventing the idea of job qualities, the different job qualities, right? So we can open up this debate, and I think reinforce your arguments by adding some pieces to it.
Thanks, Erik. Daniele or Vitantonio, would you like to respond or to comment? And then we have another round. If anyone has questions, please feel free to raise your hand and I will allow you to join the panel.
No, I don't have anything to add conceptually. Daniele said everything. I was just thinking about this problem of raw material, because we need also some of them, most of all lithium and cobalt in the semiconductors production. And this is a huge and pressing issue in the European Union now. But more than conceptually, I would like to add something related to the possibility to pinpoint the most enabling technologies, the most emerging sectors, which is the main issue, the main question that Professor Andreoni raised. And actually, I was stressing the importance of political intuition. We can do something, actually. I know that, for example, empirically now Professor Charlie at Brighton is trying to carry out a research project by using machine learning technologies in order to predict the most enabling technologies in the future. The most we can do in this kind of problem is try to look at artificial intelligence in order to see whether artificial intelligence should be funded in the next years, and also at machine learning strategies, empirically speaking. Otherwise, I don't have any answer more than what you said so far, you know. I think it is about political will more than anything else. But yeah, this is the main question anyway.
Okay, Ellen, I think I don't see anyone else from the audience, so I'll pass the word to you again, and then Reinert, if you'd like to rejoin with further comments, you're welcome. Please, Ellen.
It's just a very small comment. We talked about technologies and to understand which ones are going to be the relevant technologies. Well, the steam technology that we talk about, the steam trains, was invented in the Hellenistic Alexandria, 300 BC, and it was used in the Industrial Revolution. So it's not really about the technology. So we want to see where we are going, where the leadership is taking us, where the environment takes us, decide on that, and then we have to decide which technologies are the more appropriate to put together or to develop further. It's not about saying, you know, the globe, the glass globe, which technologies are going to work. You can't really see it. You have a COVID that nobody expected, and you have something completely unexpected in your horizon. This is my very short intervention.
Thanks, Anna.
I mean, we should do imitation, adaptation, as China did so far, if I'm not wrong.
Adaptation and imitation are always in the beginning when you start from a certain point, and that is absolutely fine. You learn by that, and then you improve. But this is exactly what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is leave our options open and then decide where we want to go. I accept that leadership is a point, but then the rest can be put forward with the goals that we set. Because if we don't have a set goal, then where are we going?
Yes.
Reinert, please. Where are we going?
No, I just wanted to. I don't know that, but no, I was just thinking that you know, we talk about public ownership and leadership in industry, but I think there's at the same time there are I think other kinds of public ownerships that we need to talk about as well. Or, you know, for instance, around public space, in terms of the street, the urban space, all that is so relevant for the mobility, but also the way we move around, the way we eat, and all this sort of more behavioral sides of things, where I think we have also let the ball drop in terms of how do we develop urban spaces in a way that is actually both conducive for health, but also conducive for industrialization and knowledge. So I think this is one aspect of public ownership, I guess, that is also really relevant. And the other one, of course, as you mentioned already, Daniele, about the data and data sovereignty, and which I think is again, I think we have perhaps an easy juxtaposition between private and public data. There is probably something in between that is more like a common type of ownership of these kind of assets that need to be thought through in a much deeper way, I think, also on the European level. And of course, there are these various sort of attempts to do it. There's this Gaia development that the European Union tries to develop technology standards in this space as well. But I think this is where I think a lot more work needs to be done to understand how successful these attempts are, or if they're not successful, why they're not successful. And so both these kind of public ownership, I think, are as important, I think, as are the things that you were talking about, which is more on the industrial capability side.
Any reaction from our speakers on this point, which of course links back to, again, the very specific nature of also this digital platform, and the source of power and the source of value, and the capturing of the value in the form of data and different type of algorithms.
There is one issue which, of course, worries us, and I think that since none of us is a mainstream economist, this has not emerged. Basically, if you enter into a new market by creating some large monopolistic, oligopolistic corporations, you may justify it because you say, if there is an oligopoly, I would better at least have one member into the oligopoly. And that's the Chinese view. The Chinese say, if there's going to be an Amazon, I have no reason to leave my internal market in the hands of Amazon. I want to create the Chinese Amazon, So the basic idea is always better your own monopoly to the monopoly of another country. And that makes sense. Is it possible to create a competitive market through emerging technologies? And here I think that there is a basic diversion between what was the Japanese strategy, which often used competition among Japanese firms to conquer some markets, especially in the 80s and in the 90s. And the South Korean strategy. Basically, there is no government in South Korea. The government is Samsung, and the political government is just a subsidiary of Samsung, And this, of course, is a problem, because you may wonder if at a certain point you manage to create internally a competition among a few corporations which manages to push up the situation, also benefiting the forces of competition. In one way, and that's what Guido presented earlier, the European Battery Alliance is already an idea to follow the Japanese system, not to support one player which will take all the market, but rather to create a variety of players which are forced to get a knowledge base together and then to compete into the market, And on that, I think there is, I perfectly understand that the industrial strategy might diverge into the Japanese model on the one hand and the Korean model on the other hand,
And if I may on that, because I think it's interesting, you used some cases, right, that we have already observed in the European context, right? And now you're referring to this different way of managing competition. And of course, managing competition means also understanding what is the relevant market, right, where competition is exercised, right? So if we look back at these two recent cases in the last 2-3 years, when Alstom and Siemens were trying to do some joint initiatives to move in the space of IoT and all the more advanced digital systems. And of course, they had very complementary set of capabilities. That was blocked. There was strong resistance in the antitrust in Europe to have that type of, and the argument of the two companies was, well, we are not competing in Europe, we are competing, we have a proposition that competes in the global market, and that is the only scale that can work out. The other case in that case was an Italian-French merger, and Fincantieri, in this case, the Italian, still partially state-owned company, was taking over some of the aesthetics, the naval industry in France, in the north of France, which was left by the South Koreans after the company collapsed. Again, that was another case where there was strong resistance for one country to take actually a leadership in investing significantly in creating this sort of European company champion for competing internationally in this industry, where traditionally we had leadership, which has been lost to other countries, China, Korea, and so on over the years. So in all these cases, it seems that, while the world is becoming much more protectionist and industrial policy focused and so on, it seems Europe is very much still using traditional liberal market type of approaches and seems to find difficult to get to speed with the nature of the market and sector they're talking about. So I would like to invite you to reflect on that, because these are just two cases. I mean, we could talk many others, where clearly there was a misunderstanding of competition in relevant market and how industrial competition policy work together. But maybe you have been looked at more than those.
I agree. Yes, I mean, I don't think that there is a strategy which is good for everything, and I think that for European battery is fine. From what I understand, the batteries are, batteries are a transversal technology, often specialized suppliers, and therefore apparently there is not the need of one corporation which does everything. So if you put together money, credit, and knowledge, the three things together, it's possible that you will manage to get something done, and that Europe might become a leader into this sector. If you start to think about data-intensive companies, I'm not sure. If you start to think even about retaining, Amazon has taken on the market, and I'm not sure if you can really generate a competitive market, an oligopoly of about 5-10 different corporations. Even China, at a certain point, I decided, that is a problem of Alibaba. Do it as you can.
Maybe Erik, may I invite you to, because I don't, no, there is another question. I think Elena still has the answer from before. Erik, can I invite you to reflect on this issue? Because of course, many people talk about the new era of monopoly capitalism, right? And new manifestation of the old problem, Baron-Sweezy and all the classical debate on what monopoly capitalism means and how companies establish their power in the international market. What would be your take on this problem?
Well, first on the comment on Korea, how the Korean model was created and what circumstances. It was created around, the ideology around 1947, when the Americans understood that they had to reindustrialize, should we say, a sanitary belt around the communist countries, because the communist countries were doing really well. And this was US only 5-star general, Mr. Marshall, and the Marshall Plan. So the Japanese and the Koreans and Chris Freeman has written about the moonlighting between engineers from Japan and Korea, and they were given capital at negative rate, and they said, well, go and do your thing and build new technology, but you have to make money after 8 or 10 years or something like that. So this was a system, this was a way of thinking, which was part of the Cold War. And I think you're very right in your comment all of you, that Europe is being ruined by neoclassical economics. In a sense, that's my view. That they believe in this perfect competition, which is at Harvard Business School, that was called hostile markets. A hostile market is what neoclassical economists call perfect competition. So I think all this is really very relevant, and I think we have to start thinking a bit like the Koreans did. To what extent they still do it, but I think we have to pick certain sectors. We can see that with techno-economic paradigms, there's clearly a movement to monopolies, but then the whole thing starts over with new companies. Radio Corporation of America had a monopoly on radio tubes, so for radios. And then comes a new technology, and Radio Corporation of America kind of disappears into the background. I think we have to understand that this is the way it works, and we have to. I mean, the literature on monopolies in the United States is huge, and how to control it, how much to allow of it, and credible competition, or whatever they call it. But I think this is the way we have to start to think that imperfect competition is good because it allows wages to go up. So then how imperfect? Well, that's a different story, and how we should distribute this within Europe with the losers in the periphery at the moment. I think euro has been very damaging to countries in the periphery. Earlier, Europe could adjust by adjusting exchange rates. If Portugal was out of line, well, devalue the escudo, and this disappeared. And I think this is creating a centripetal force in Europe, which we have to deal with. But I think we also have to understand that this is in the interest of Germany and few others. Let's say it that way. So that's also an issue, not only finance but also exchange rates. And Greece, of course, is an example of a country which should never have got into the Europe, in my view.
Thanks, Erik. Reinert, you have also a chance before we give the last couple of minutes to Daniele and Vitantonio to just conclude, if you have any final remark.
I'm fine. I'll let Daniele and Vitantonio speak. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we had a quite long and interesting discussion. To the speaker, the last words, please.
Well, very briefly, it is a pleasure to be in the Institute. Let's see if we have got a convergence within the mission-oriented programs on the one end, but also through a more direct intervention at the European level. I repeat, at the European level, because that's, I think, what we try to adapt to your research program is the idea that something can be done with direct production also at the European level, and that's what we would suggest.